Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 22, Tracking Learning Objectives and Practice. Well, Beau, we took a break. An unscheduled break for a few weeks. We had graduations on my end. We had health issues on my end. we had a lot of things going on. Some of it good that was distracting, but and then also I think it's good for us to take a break every so often. I think when we come back to it, it's a lot more fresh.
Yep.
I feel fresh. So one of the things that's been on my mind, Beau, it's been a while before I brought it up, but you always have these papers around your room, these signs. And I go, what do you keep track of your stuff, man? Is that your lessons, or is that for you when you're practicing? Do you have both? What are the things that keep your planning? Like, how do you know what to do, when to do it? And I like the shorthand because I fall down on this all the time in terms of what I plan and what I do.
Yeah.
And I think we need to look at it from a teaching perspective, and then also when you're practicing, because they always go hand in hand, it seems.
Yeah, I use two different systems, one for myself, my own learning, and then I use a different system for my students. But I think this is important. And as a big disclaimer here, I'm 33 now. I did not grow up as an organized practicer in terms of here are my practice goals that I've written down, and here's what I tick off daily, and then I take time to reflect on it and see if I'm doing things that make sense or it needs to be. I did not grow up like that. It was just pure chaos. It was I like this lick, I'm going to play it 400 times this week, and that generally works when you're 13 and your brain is a learning machine. But at some point you got to be smarter about how you approach this stuff, because you can just get more out of your practice when you keep track of things, and it can be done with very minimal effort and time commitment. I'm not talking about spending hours every week planning what you're doing and tracking it and stuff like that.
I wonder if AI could help with that. Maybe.
I'm sure it could. I mean, I'm sure AI will get to the point where it can even give you methods of tracking that would be more useful for your own proclivities and personality type and everything. So maybe let's start with what do I track with students, And so if they're doing exams, I'm going to track all the stuff they need to be learning for the exams. That's one thing we'll get into. But for the average student I have, that's just, a general student, I have a file on Evernote, which is, you could use Google Docs or whatever. Evernote is really not necessary for this. All I do is I write the date down, and I write the songs that we covered that date. And so this just gives me an idea of the repertoire that they know.
Is each file labeled by the kid's name or something?
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, just label it by their name. And so this gives me an idea of, at a quick glance, what we've done over the past 4 lessons. It's just names of songs. And I make sure to review a lot. So a lot of the classes, we're replaying things we can already play, and I'm adding subtle, they can already play this tune. Now you got to play it with better articulation and phrasing. You can already play this tune. Now we're going to change the rhythm of it. So I keep that as a menu to know what they've been doing. And then at the very top of the Evernote file is where they are tonally and where they are rhythmically in a very loose fashion. I don't have my rhythm learning sequence content sequence that I take them through is a lot more self-evident, microbeats, macrobeats, subdivisions. So I keep track of where they are with that. But tonally, I don't follow a prescribed, I don't go to, generally
content
one
sequence.
Yeah, it's more dependent on what they listen to. So they're all going to learn 1, 5, and 4, but after that, it's chaos. I have no idea what's coming next. It's going to be more based off of what they listen to, and the tonalities that come at them are going to be different for each student. And so the way that I can I'm a very chaotic teacher in the sense, like, if this student likes Aeolian, let's go. I'm not waiting to do it for some reason. But when you teach very, like, air quote, chaotically, in the sense where you're transcribing songs by ear, the repertoire is in the air a lot for me. I'm just teaching them things that they listen to, and I'm teaching them tonalities and tonal patterns that are more based off of their own personalized listening repertoire. You have to have a way to track this, or it's just going to be, you can't build on things, right?
Yeah.
And so I just keep a note, like, okay, we sang 1 and 5 tonal patterns, or we sang Aeolian, this Aeolian progression.
Yeah.
And I just make sure to repeat that, because basically, if you're not repeating things, especially if you only have lessons once a week, it's not going to grow. Yeah. So this has been a nice balance for me to give students a lot of power in choosing the repertoire if they're interested in. Not all kids are interested in choosing their own repertoire, by the way. Some kids just want to be told what songs to play. Yeah. And so that's the very loose way that I track this stuff. And I'll just pause like there for...
Yeah. I do. When I used to do a lot more of this, AO, VA, PS, our oral verbal association, parallel synthesis. It's like, where are we? And then, like, and I would put big M, capital M for major, and small m for minor, and all the other, thank God, all the other tonalities have their own letter.
I mean, that very well may be...
MX is, yeah. And I would just write down these little things like, okay, here's the tunes we learned.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, for a whole year or 2 years, that's all I did. I put the names of the songs up on the board, and all the songs in one tonality were one color, and another tonality were another color. And I said, okay, pick a color.
Mm-hmm.
Or pick a song. If they couldn't read, they just picked the color. And anyway, this is a way to make sure that I was always teaching the same. I was counting on the kids to have learned the repertoire after so many weeks, and I always went back and reviewed. And every time we learned a new song, it would go up on the board.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the thing I did. And it really helped. The kids were excited, and they got to pick the color.
Mm-hmm.
And then after we did a couple songs in each color, or in 2 colors, it's like, okay, now you can't pick that color anymore. So they pick another color, and that was one existence system that I had for the kids. When they come in, they see the board, and they're like, okay, what color are we gonna? It's like a visual representation of tonalities.
Totally.
Just with the titles in different colors.
I'm a big fan of students. I'm talking mainly about my one-on-one students here, because I don't teach in a group setting generally. But because I don't teach with notation, for quite a while usually, the students, if you use sheet music, the students literally have a reminder. Oh yeah, I learned this song. Oh yeah, I should practice this song. But if you're just teaching things through audiation and you're sending them recordings, it can get lost in the digital vortex very easily. Mm-hmm. So I'll often just ask students to keep a 1-page list of every song that they know. And that's just, it doesn't tell them anything about how to play the song. It just keeps, in between lessons, their mind
keeps it present. I always use the term existence. It's existing outside of yourself. Like, you can't just remember all the time. You've got to be able to have some mm-hmm. kind of, existence outside of your brain. Because if it's in your brain, it's taken up memory that you don't need to be using if you can write it down.
Yep.
As a shorthand method to remind you of what else, because you don't write down every little thing.
Yeah, I mean, I actually
find B flat in measured 3. I'm sorry, Jack. You got. I've got to write this down.
Yeah, I would highly stress keeping this efficient and simple. So when I first started this Evernote thing, like 3 or 4 years ago, I was writing so many details. But now I do just bare bones repertoire and where they are with tonal patterns and rhythm patterns, and that is very light in the sense that you can kind of see where they are with tonal patterns and rhythm patterns, because if I just don't find a purpose to do like oral verbal association, because if it says subdivisions, I just ask them to listen and then copy it, and if they can't copy the subdivisions, I know exactly where they are. Yeah, it doesn't require hyper detailed note taking. And a big tip, if you can, write this stuff down in the lesson, because if you teach from 3 to 8 p.m., you're going to create like an hour of work for yourself at the end of the day to go through all your notes, or half an hour or whatever. Just take a second every time you finish a song. If you're working on it for a few minutes, just pause, write it down on your computer, because it's just, you don't want to create extra work for yourself later. And so
so I remember too on this, so I'd have a tonality. There was just on one side of the board, and on the other side of the board was rhythm and meter, and I'd have different colors for that. And then we start swapping. It's like, okay, pick a blue song and tell me what color you want to turn it into. Mm-hmm. And then I'd play a familiar, so they said orange, so I'd play a familiar orange song, and I say, you want Twinkle Twinkle to sound like that, so we're going to take this blue song from the major column and we're going to turn it orange, and the kids got a blast out of that. But I also did, that song needs to move in 2s, and this song needs to move in 3s, and then can we take the same song, and we did the same thing with that. So pick a color and pick a meter. So there's a color, or pick a color and then a different set of colors. I think it was like black and brown, and all the leftover colors were the meters. And all the red, green, purple, pink, and all that. Black, brown, and gray, and light brown, and anyway, those are all the meters. So pick one from this group, one from that group. What song do you want? And then we discovered new tonalities and new manifestations of these songs once they knew the familiar versions. And I just kept doing that for a while. And then entered style, right? So then we could swing it or not swing it. And we could do Latin or not Latin, or syncopated, or, those things kind of cross over a bit, but
those are also things I will write notes about in a student's file. So, and sometimes I'll put it at the top. Like if I've shown the student the difference between how to swing and how to not swing, I will actually just write that at the top of their list, because I want to make sure I review that several times. You can't just show them swing once and assume they're going to permanently remember it. They might get it the first time, but you're essentially memory farming at this place. You're trying to help make sure that they retain this over long periods of time. Same with little things like staccato. If you teach staccato as an actual audiated concept, not as a linguistic definition of something being short, but actually, this is staccato. This is not staccato. This is staccato. Not staccato. It only takes 30 seconds to inductively teach that. I want to make sure they retain that. And, after I review that 3 or 4 lessons in a row, there's no reason not to. It takes 15 seconds. Then they just have it locked in forever, because I will keep talking about staccato after that.
Yeah.
And so
if you're
that's
teaching
important.
something, you want to say, this is worth being part of this kid, not something you're going to teach and the kid got it, but you got to be able to come back a couple months later after you haven't talked about it and the kid's already got it. So there's a certain amount of repetition. This always goes back to direct instruction with us, but keeping track of that. And I think direct instruction too has this component of know exactly where you are.
Totally. So you said 2 things that I want to touch on. One is the memory spacing benefits. So I don't know what episode, but we talked about the spacing effect is one of the most robust things you can do that's been demonstrated by psychology learning research to help you memorize stuff. So space things, across larger periods of time. Don't just play something 10 times one day. Play it a few times one day, wait a couple days, play it again, wait a week, play it again. You'll learn it better if you do that. So one of the ways you can take advantage, if you have records of what songs students have done, what I typically do is I cover everything that was done last lesson and the lesson before, and then I scroll down just a little bit and I cover a song that hasn't been covered for like a month. And then once in a while I cover a song that hasn't been done in like 3 or 4 months. And this, you don't have to get like hyper, like at this point you don't need like graph paper or like spaced repetition programs that say it's not that necessary, because this produces so much benefit compared to not doing it. It's not even worth getting so detailed about it. But I just scroll down and say, okay, we haven't done this for a while. Let's see if they remember this. And then just bring it back. The other thing that you mentioned is DI has a way of doing this, which, Eric and I are currently having a love affair with direct instruction. The way DI does this is absolutely genius.
I think we're divorcing ourselves.
So earlier I mentioned when I have kind of my normal music students, I just keep track of it on an Evernote file. When I have students who are taking an exam, or when I teach myself new things, I keep track of everything on graph paper. And it sounds crazy. It sounds like, oh my God, this is going to be like way too much stuff. Graph paper makes this hilariously easy, because I'm the kind of person who I'll get all jazzed up about something for 2 weeks. I'll follow any practicing strategy, any tracking strategy for 2 weeks, and then I'll lose interest. So I need a strategy that is resilient to neglect. And I need a strategy that once I lose interest, it'll be easy to follow through on. So basically all I do is I have a notebook with graph paper open, learning objectives on the side, going down on the left, the date or the boxes on the right. And I know basically I want to do something 3 days in a row and then take a week off, and then 3 days in a row and take 2 weeks off. So you can visually see this super clearly. Like I have, we don't have visual on this podcast.
I could take a picture and put it and post it if it helps.
This might help. This is what I'm.
All right, hold it right there, and we'll post this. Bert Ligon outlines 1, 2, and 3. All right, I'll post that just to give them a reference point.
So this, if you are looking at the image, I mean, basically this is the thing from the end of May into early part of June. What's written down here might not make a lot of sense unless I explain it, but it doesn't really matter. It's basically just tonal learning objectives. And so if you take into account this spacing literature stuff, you want to do something about 3 days in a row, and then you want to give a week break, another 3 days, 2 weeks break, another 3 days. After you do that, it's pretty much locked in permanently. And so all I have to do when I sit down to practice, I just look at this and I say, okay, I've done this like a few days in a row. I can take a break. And so it helps me make decisions about what I want to practice. Now, I prefer this being on graph paper because everything is all in one single place. You can create crazy systems that like remind you like, okay, in a week I have to practice this, but I don't like that. I want to see everything on one board.
Basically, it's a reference to so your brain quickly remembers, you see a few words that's either a song or tonality or a function or all these things that you might be working on. You look at it and it's at a glance. It's a Cliff Note version, even smaller than a Cliff Note version of a book. It's just the chapter headings. Totally. And then you go, I got to do this. And they jump out at you. If it's like, oh, that's something we haven't done in a while. Mm-hmm. Or that's something I didn't do last week when it was planned to do next. That happens more in classroom,
totally.
Content management.
This can also help you make decisions about should I be adding more stuff or not. If you're flooded in terms of the content you're trying to just retain before it gets into that 2 week, 3 week zone where you don't have to work on it anymore, don't add anymore. But if there's nothing on your schedule for today, it's okay. And you can always push it back a day or two. So if I have like everything's hitting the fan, like it's Monday, it's my busiest teaching day of the week, I'm supposed to be doing all of this tonal stuff today, but that's going to take like 2 hours to get through. Then I just say, okay, this is the most important stuff I should do today, so I don't meddle with it. And then I'm just going to push this other stuff, a day. So it helps you make decisions about what to practice and when to practice it in a really intelligent manner. And I just keep this open on my desk, so it doesn't leave my desk. It's permanently just sitting there.
I was at the beginning of this. I was like, God, I don't do this anymore. But the truth of the matter is, I have lists of just stuff. Right. Once I've started it, I put a 0 next to it, and then I put a X or part of an X on it, like I did it, but it's not there yet, and then double X, and eventually I cross the thing out like I'm never going to touch that again. Like in class, like stuff I'm going to teach. Yep. Like they totally all know what rhythm is, they all know what tones are, and so those get crossed off the list. But when I first introduce it, I either write it down or it's already written down and I put a 0 next to it, and then I can either fill in that 0 or X it off, or yep. cross the thing off completely when it's part of them. Mm-hmm. I know that they will never forget it. Now, what's funny for me this year is in implementing some of the spacing, I found out that 3 and 4-year-olds need much, like ridiculously more amounts of repetition to have something last over a month or two. So when I go back to Halloween stuff, there's only a couple things that retained, and they must have been more what's the word, more emotion. There was more emotional response to them, so they remembered them. But some of the other stuff that we did in terms of songs that maybe didn't have that same limbic system lighten up, that they looked at me like it was brand new. I thought, we did this 20 times and you guys don't remember. That
is probably one of the most valuable benefits in terms of tracking something on like graph paper, the way I was describing. Because if you do a song every day for a week and then take 2 weeks off, and then it comes back and they don't have it, and you do that same thing with another class, so not, you have more sample sizes than just one, but one sample size might actually be more than enough for making little decisions like this. You can say, okay, like this level of audiated difficulty for students at this level, I cannot leave a week in between doing that, or I have to do it for 3 weeks before I leave a break. And if you guys actually look at that image of my practice thing for the end of May, you might notice that earlier I said I do something 3 days in a row and then I take the break, but I noticed one of these things I was learning to play something in these giant steps licks that were shifting down keys in major thirds. I wasn't getting it. I was getting it okay after 3 days, but I wanted to see what would happen if I did a week and then took the break. And I found that was a little bit better. And so, this stuff only takes 5 or 10 minutes to cover. So I figured, why not? But typically I know if it's an instrumental challenge, I can do the Molly Gebrian recommended thing of 3 days and then a break. And then, there might be differences. And so one of the benefits is you start seeing patterns in things in how you do it. And I'm not keeping detailed records about like how long I practiced it or how many repetitions I practiced it. I'm just keeping records of when I worked on it. Yeah. So those are other.
So for those long breaks for the younger kids, what they did, I was operating off of their recognition. Like they looked at me, blank stares in their faces. But the truth of the matter is there was a seed that was already there. And once I went over it 2 or 3 times, it was as solid as it was when I was really hammering it. So, so you're rehatching the egg. I think is, but you're doing it. You're incubating much quicker.
Yeah, I mean your criterion for what is considered mastery changes this. Like if you're expecting them to take a month-long break and they have it on the first trial again, boom, cold, then that's going to require a lot more rigorous training to get into that. Then you're just expecting them to, after 1 or 2 repetitions to generally pick it back up.
Yeah, boy, I hate having to do that amount because that you're like preparing for, a concert or a presentation where you want all the kids to know all the words and, you got to get 90% accuracy and participation. And you spend all your time doing that, and then you've lost so much time in teaching.
Yep.
So in terms of the youngest kids, I just really don't like presentations and concerts and recitals and that kind of thing for that age, unless they're hungry for it. When a kid or a bunch of kids are hungry for it, no problem. But you get the kids, it's just devastating, traumatizing, just 1 or 2. And that just ruins you. It ruined me in 3rd grade when I was the tomato and had explained to everybody I was a fruit. And it's like, tomato's not a fruit. What's wrong with this lady? I, I just hated being up on stage.
Yeah, it can be a big turnoff for kids, for sure. I mean,
I was so resistant to
argument for
being
me.
a fruit in third grade.
I love to disagree when I can, if I can get in there, but I think you're onto something. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, so I talked about what I do with my own practice and talk about what I do with my regular music students, but some of my students are taking piano exams or classical guitar exams with the Royal Conservatory. This method of tracking things on graph paper will make exam prep so easy for you, because what you do is you make a giant list. This is the repertoire. These are the scales. These are the things they want to be able to audiate or recognize by ear. These are the arpeggios they have to play. You can get so strategic about how you unfold things. Because basically, I mean, if they have to learn 10 scales for an exam, do not teach them all 10 on the same lesson. They're going to get confused about which ones. You teach them one scale, one arpeggio, a little bit of each song, do a little bit of ear training. And then the next lesson, you just review all that and sprinkle one more of everything in and one more of everything in. So it turns into this everything is incrementally growing in every category, rather than what most, I think, teachers get into, where it's they try to learn the repertoire and then a couple weeks before the exam, and I've been guilty of this myself, especially when students aren't practicing, you try to jam 15 scales into them a week before the exam. And it's no wonder they don't like taking exams. But that's something I got from DI, is that if you're trying to teach content in one category, so if we translate DI to MLT, let's say you have to learn a tonal thing in minor, tonal thing in major, a rhythmic thing in duple, rhythmic thing in triple. Don't try to teach 50 tonal patterns in major before you introduce a tonal pattern in minor. You should slowly bleed everything that you can, including tonalities. You introduce major and minor, and then you're already doing listening exposure for everything. This method of tracking things, it makes things so easy to see. And you can change how detailed you get with this. But I've personally found you don't have to be that detailed. You just need a general eye on okay, what have they done? What needs to be repeated? Again, because if you're not repeating things, they're going to be forgotten, and they're going to be
memory stimulators, so that you're not accidentally dropping out something. And then
exactly,
and obviously when you add something that was unintentional or not planned, pop that in, because that's not going to be part of your typical sequence necessarily.
That's a really good point. So when you're with a student and they seem to be ready for something, or you accidentally covered something, one of my students, she really got into, there was a certain song she listened to that had this half diminished 2 chord that I loved. So in the key of C, we're talking about D minor 7 flat 5. And she could audiate it. And I'm why not? I just added it to her tonal pattern. So, just for some context, if you guys want. She was auditing this.
And I like going to the 6th chord there.
Oh, yeah. Eric hears this as the 5 of 6. He's hearing this.
That's just one of them. It could go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean,
it goes to the 2.
It's a beautiful chord, and it's actually surprisingly easy for people to hear. It sounds, theoretically it sounds crazy, but it's not that hard to audiate.
But then you write that chord down, and just oh, we got into it, and so then something you will remember to review with them again. Without those visual cues, listen, our memories are crap. Memories.
It's insane. If you're a one-on-one music teacher, you got 20 to 40 students. Good luck memorizing everything.
And now being 62.
and the thing is, you don't want to use your working memory on this kind of stuff. You don't want to think oh, what was I doing last time with the student and all that. You just want a quick reminder. This is what they were.
No, my memory is definitely not the way it was 5 years ago. Not even close. Noticing quite a bit. So these things are essential, especially for the older folks out there. But I think boy, even when you're really spot spot on with so much of what you can retain. Like my college schedule, I had 14 or 15 different classes, and everybody goes like, "What? You didn't have like three credit class? 4, 12 credits, 16 credits, whatever it was." No, I had everything, and I just like look. After a week, it was in my brain, and you just remembered homework. You didn't write anything down. Eventually, that stuff goes away.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, another way that you could use this like graph paper thing that would be in more of an MLT curriculum is just keeping track of the tonal patterns or the tonal pattern sets that you teach kids. You might not want to write down each individual tonal pattern, but you might want to say, okay, I start with these.
Well, they
major...
do have the register books.
Sure.
Easy, medium, difficult patterns, and and names for like that. I find those wonky, but something like that if it works, it works. But I found that took too much time, especially if I'm trying to teach. I just teach all the patterns to all the kids. If they don't get them, the worst thing that's happened is they were imitating, or they were, or the worst thing is, they're acculturating in them, right? Absorbing, and
yep.
If they can't do it, but I this will be a whole nother episode. But the taxonomy for tonal patterns that came out in like the 3rd or is it the 4th edition? I think it was the 4th edition. The Burgundy book has the taxonomy. Like, what are the most difficult sets of patterns, and the easiest, what tonalities and what functions, all those. I wonder, like, what do we go to if we went back and took those and played them harmonically, horizontally instead of vertically? Or
a combination of both, right?
Right. So play tonal patterns in time, and then play those tonal patterns that are supposed to be representing functions, and play them.
So longtime listeners of the podcast will know that I myself am not scared at all about speculative claims about what works better and what doesn't work better. And one of the reasons why I make a lot of claims like this is I will track things. I will track my own learning, jazz progressions using the system that Eric recommends versus using just singing tonal patterns. It is clear as day on paper which one works better. And so it is still speculation. I haven't run a randomized control trial of or like some kind of control group based study, but I can see like, okay, when I sing bass lines and play harmonic, play actual just chords behind the tonal patterns, I learn the patterns faster, and so do my students. And so yeah, you can be a bit empirical about how you do this. This was also another thing, Eric, that led me to make the claim that I think learning long sets of tonal patterns is great. Bum 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 bum. That's Andy's set, and I have used that forever. I still use the same set. I just don't teach it as one giant set now. I teach it a couple at a time.
Yeah, I would do like phone numbers 7. I would do no more than 7.
Mm-hmm.
And then add. Actually, the full set should be really no more than 7, and it's plus or minus. What is the math behind this? The theory for working memory limitation is plus or minus 7. That was Miller. I think it was Miller's paper, but that's been heavily critiqued. Even though
is it debunked? No, it's not debunked by any means, but it's just more like 4.
Okay.
But hold on. Let's keep in mind these working memory limitation. We're talking about whatever's on your mind. So, like, let's say a tonal pattern, and then asking student to do something like an inference activity. Those are both taking up working memory slots. So whatever's in their mind and whatever you're asking them to do, like instruction wise, those are both separate working memory units. So it's like 7 plus or minus 3, but only in the negative direction.
Yeah. So anyway, shorter, a shorter sequence initially, and then add as you go, and then keep track of it.
Or there's a middle ground between these two, is you show the students the full pattern as like listening exposure. So they're listening to the whole 16 set of patterns, but you're actually only getting into verbal association and really zeroing in on like the first 4 of the patterns. And that's something that I've done. So they're familiar with the rest of it. I'm not putting it on the instrument. I'm not verbal associating the whole thing yet.
Yeah. And then play them with harmonic accompaniment and without harmonic accompaniment.
Mm-hmm.
So, because we're getting into the another online discussion and Facebook group about the patterns being a little bit subjective as to what function they're relating to, especially if it's just a 2-note pattern, could fit to 3 or 4 or more functions.
I mean, it could just never stop.
Yeah.
This
so
it goes over
resting tone is insufficient. We need that's.
I mean, it can pretty much go over everything. There's not really a reason why not.
Yeah, no. So you need tonality, and you need the harmonic context. So
yeah. So I mean, those are some ideas on how to track things. I mean, the last thing I want to just re-emphasize is make this easy on yourself. Make the method of tracking easy. So the system that I was showing you, what it requires of me each day is to tick like 3 to 5 X's on a piece of paper. You want to keep the commitment, low on this.
If it adds work, it's not a good system. It should subtract the amount of work you need to do.
I mean, don't get me wrong. If it adds work and gives benefit, I'm willing to do the work. But if it adds work and I don't get much benefit from it, then I'm not excited about that system.
Yeah. So, have a room where you can put all your Post-it notes all over the room. Keep it organized where you have them. Blue is household. Green is doctor's appointments. Red.
You can teach students to do this too, by the way. Like I have one student, I think she's 10 or 11 right now, but she's doing classical guitar exams. I don't even keep track of it myself. I just make her do it. So she has a piece of paper with all the scales that we'll need to learn. And I do a simplified version with her. There's just a box next to anything we've covered and a box. And so if we've covered it, it has a check mark and she's responsible to keep practicing it. If it hasn't been covered, there's no check mark and she doesn't track it. I don't even track it because there's no point. She has it and she shows it to me. And then in the lesson, I'm like, okay, choose a scale we haven't covered yet and we'll do that. And so I think it's a really good idea. I mean, 10-year-old kids are learning to sing tonal patterns and track their exam prep with DI like based tracking method. Like this is insane. I wish I had someone doing that with me, but no, it's really cool. And it's simple. Like the 10-year-old can do it. I don't have to coach the parent into I just say, this is your practice menu. Yeah.
It's a matter of whether it becomes a habit or not. So you got to do it for 6 weeks or more in a row.
I think the average is 18 to like 260 days for a habit. So there's some, there's some wiggle room.
Depends
there.
on what it is, I guess.
Yeah, caffeine is like 1 week. It's a habit. Getting off caffeine is more like 250 days.
All right. Well, I'll let you go tick something off of your to-do list for today. It's a good conversation. Keeping track of what you're doing in a physical world so that it doesn't have to be in your mind, and it can be a memory jogger so that you're being more effective and efficient with where each kid or each class, where they're at.
In terms of like very practical advice, Evernote works really well, or Google Documents is fine for all of the simple tracking where you just have a date with repertoire. Evernote has, this is so sad, but Evernote has the worst graph paper like tables ever. They do not work well for this. So don't try to use Evernote for tracking things with graph paper. You got to use actual graph paper, or if you want to do it on the computer, you got to use like Google spreadsheets or something, but it works well.
When I'm teaching, I can't go to the computer for anything. I don't do any of that. In between classes, if I'm lucky, you got 30 seconds to do something. But no, I'm a yellow pad, legal pad guy, and then I transfer anything incomplete off of that first page. It's all a mess now, and transfer things onto the next one, and it helps you reorganize in your mind. What's next, and a legal pad per class is really I didn't mention that. It's really one of my things that I've done for a long time.
Yeah, you could do this with just regular paper, and just you don't actually need the graph paper. I've always wanted to go to like one of these Office Depot stores and buy giant craft paper and just put this stuff like on my wall so it permanently doesn't move, but that's the next step.
All right, sir.
All right, that was fun.
Very good. Thank you.
Till next time, guys.